The Arizona sun hadn't yet burned away the morning mist when Sarah Brennan pressed herself against the rough bark of the cottonwood tree, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might betray her hiding spot. Through the silver-green leaves, she watched the Apache war party ride past, their painted horses moving like shadows through the canyon. She should have been terrified. Any sensible white woman would have been. But Sarah Brennan had stopped being sensible the moment she'd watched her father's murderer ride away wearing the silver watch that had belonged to her grandfather. She'd been tracking Jack Morrison's gang for 3 weeks now, following them deeper into Apache territory than any white woman had dared venture alone. The outlaws thought they were safe out here, thought the desert would protect them. They didn't know about Sarah's stubborn streak, the one her mother had always said would either save her life or end it. The gang had stopped at a spring 2 miles back, and Sarah had been planning her approach when the Apache warriors' appearance from the Red Rock itself. The last rider was different from the others. He sat his horse with an authority that needed no announcement, and even from a distance, Sarah could see the intelligence in his dark eyes as they scanned the landscape. This was no ordinary warrior. The eagle feathers in his black hair and the deference the others showed him marked him as someone important. A chief, perhaps, or at least someone who commanded great respect. She watched as he suddenly raised his hand, bringing the entire party to an instant halt. Her breath caught. Had he seen her? Sarah remained absolutely still, though every instinct screamed at her to run. Running would be death. She knew that much about Apache warriors. The chief's gaze swept the area where she hid, and for one terrible moment, their eyes met through the screen of leaves. Time seemed to stop. She saw his hand move toward the rifle across his lap, saw the slight narrowing of his eyes. Then, inexplicably, he looked away and signaled his men forward. The war party continued down the canyon, leaving Sarah shaking against the tree trunk. It wasn't until they disappeared from view that she realized she'd been holding her breath. She slid down the bark until she was sitting in the dirt, her legs suddenly unable to hold her. Why hadn't he raised the alarm? He'd seen her, she was certain of it. Those dark eyes had looked directly into hers, and yet he'd ridden on. The mystery of it gnawed at her, but she couldn't afford to dwell on it. Morrison's gang wouldn't stay at the spring forever, and she had a promise to keep to her father's memory. Sarah pulled herself to her feet and began working her way toward the spring, moving from cover to cover as her father had taught her during their years managing the trading post. He'd shown her how to read the land, how to move quietly, how to survive in country that didn't forgive mistakes. She'd learned well, but nothing had prepared her for what she found when she finally reached the rocky outcrop overlooking the spring. The Apache war party had found Morrison's gang first. The scene below was chaos. Gunfire echoed off the canyon walls as the outlaws tried to defend their position against warriors who fought with a precision that spoke of years of warfare. Sarah watched, frozen, as Morrison himself took aim at the chief who had spared her. Everything in that moment became crystal clear. If Morrison killed that warrior, she'd never understand why he'd let her live. More than that, something in her rebelled at the thought of the noble-looking chief being shot down by the man who'd murdered her father. She didn't think. Sarah raised her own rifle, her father's Winchester that she'd carried for 3 weeks through desert and stone, and fired. The shot went wide of Morrison but close enough to spoil his aim. His bullet struck rock instead of flesh, and in the confusion that followed, the chief's warriors overwhelmed the outlaw position. She'd revealed herself with that shot, and now warriors were scrambling up the rocks toward her hiding place. Sarah stood, knowing she had perhaps 30 seconds before they reached her. She could run, but where? She could fight, but against how many? Instead, she did something that surprised even herself. She stepped into full view, laid her rifle on the ground, and raised her hands. But she kept her eyes on the chief, who had dismounted and was now staring up at her with an expression she couldn't read. Recognition flickered across his face, followed by something else. Curiosity, perhaps. or respect. When the warriors reached her, they were rough but not brutal. They bound her hands and brought her down to the spring where the surviving outlaws were being tied to trees. Morrison was among them, blood streaming from a wound on his head, his eyes wide with fear. He didn't even recognize Sarah at first, probably didn't remember the face of the trading post owner's daughter. Why would he? She'd been nobody to him, just another witness to be eliminated after he'd taken what he wanted and killed anyone who resisted. The chief approached her slowly, and Sarah forced herself to stand tall despite her bound hands. Up close, he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, with a face that spoke of both strength and intelligence. He studied her for a long moment, then spoke in surprisingly good English. "You saved my life," he said simply. "Why?" Sarah met his gaze directly. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "Maybe because you saved mine first. You saw me in the trees. You could have given me away." A slight smile touched his lips. "You tracked these men," he said, gesturing toward the outlaws. "It wasn't a question." "The one with the bleeding head killed my father," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "Killed him for a silver watch and $40. I followed them to see justice done." The chief's eyes showed understanding and something else. Respect, definitely. But also a calculating look that made Sarah's pulse quicken for entirely different reasons than fear. He turned and spoke rapidly in Apache to his warriors, then looked back at her. "I am Nahilzi," he said. "My people call me Chief. These white men attacked a peaceful Apache camp 2 days ago. Killed women. Killed children." His voice remained controlled, but Sarah heard the fury beneath it. "We seek justice too." The next hours passed in a blur of activity and tension that would change Sarah Brennan's life forever. Nahilzi's warriors made camp at the spring, and Sarah found herself seated near the chief's fire, her hands still bound but treated with more courtesy than she'd expected. Morrison and his gang weren't so fortunate. They'd been secured separately, under heavy guard, and their faces showed the kind of fear that came from knowing exactly what fate probably awaited them. Sarah watched Nahilzi move among his warriors, speaking to each one, checking wounds, offering quiet words that seemed to bring comfort or resolve. He carried himself with natural authority, but there was nothing arrogant about it. He reminded her of her father in that way, how Daniel Brennan had commanded respect at the trading post, not through bluster, but through fairness and strength of character. The parallel was painful and somehow comforting at the same time. When Nahilzi finally returned to the fire, he brought food and water. He untied Sarah's hands himself, an act that made several of his warriors exchange glances. "You eat," he said. "Then we talk." Sarah's stomach reminded her that she'd been living on hardtack and jerky for weeks. The food was simple but good roasted rabbit, some kind of bread made from ground seeds, and water that tasted sweeter than anything she'd drunk in days. She ate slowly, aware that every warrior in camp was watching her, measuring her, trying to understand why their chief showed her such consideration. "Your father," Nahilzi said when she'd finished eating. "Tell me about him." The request surprised her, but Sarah found herself talking. She told him about Daniel Brennan, who'd come west after the war with nothing but determination and had built a trading post that served as neutral ground between cultures. Her father had learned to speak some Apache, had dealt fairly with all who came to trade, had raised his daughter alone after her mother died of fever. He'd taught Sarah to shoot, to track, to survive, but also to read and write and think for herself. "He sounds like a man of honor," Nahilzi said when she finished. "Such men are rare in any tribe. He was the best man I knew," Sarah said quietly. "When Morrison came through, my father had $40 in the till and a silver watch his own father had given him. Morrison wanted both. My father gave him the money but refused to give up the watch. It was all he had left of his father, you see. Morrison shot him for it." shot him and left him bleeding on the floor of our post while I watched from the storage room where my father had told me to hide. Nalze's expression darkened. You saw this? Every moment of it. I held my father while he died. He made me promise not to go after them alone, but I couldn't keep that promise. Sarah's voice cracked slightly. The law wouldn't come out here. They said my father knew the risks of running a trading post on the frontier. Said they couldn't spare men to chase outlaws into Apache territory. So I came myself. To do what? Nahilze asked, though his eyes suggested he already knew the answer. To see justice done. One way or another. The chief nodded slowly, and Sarah saw approval in his expression. My people understand this need for justice. 2 days ago, these men attacked our winter camp. They were drunk, looking for sport. They killed 3 women who were gathering water. One of them was my sister. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She looked toward where Morrison and his men sat bound and felt her hatred burn even hotter. I'm sorry, she said, and meant it. I'm so sorry for your loss. Now you understand why I let you live in the trees, Nahilze said. I saw in your eyes what I feel in my heart. The need for justice. The pain of loss. I could not kill someone who suffers as I suffer. They sat in silence for a moment. 2 people from different worlds united by grief and the thirst for vengeance. Finally, Sarah spoke. What will you do with them? They will face Apache justice, Nahilze said simply. They killed our people. They will answer for it. And me? The chief's expression became unreadable. That is complicated. My warriors want to know why I show you favor. Some think you should be held as captive, traded back to your people for horses or weapons. Others think you should face judgment for being white, for being part of the people who take our land. But you disagree, Sarah said, reading the subtext in his words. You saved my life. Among my people, that creates a debt of honor. But more than that, you are not like other whites I have known. You track these men alone, knowing you might die. You seek justice for your father's murder. These are things an Apache understands and respects. He paused, his dark eyes studying her face. But there is a problem. If I simply let you go, my warriors will question my judgment. They will say I am weak, that I favor whites over my own people. This I cannot allow. Sarah's heart began to race. What are you saying? There is one way I can protect you and maintain my honor, Nahilze said slowly. One way that would make you untouchable to my warriors, that would give you a place in our tribe and keep you safe. What way? The chief took a deep breath, and Sarah saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Not threat, but something else. Something that spoke of loneliness and perhaps a recognition of something kindred in her. You could become my wife, he said quietly, not as a captive, but as a partner. Someone who shares my grief and my purpose. My first wife died 3 winters ago. My son needs a mother. And I find in you something I did not expect to find in a white woman. Strength, honor, understanding. Sarah stared at him, her mind reeling. Marriage? To an Apache chief? The idea was insane, impossible. Everything her upbringing had taught her to fear and reject. And yet, as she looked into Nahilze's eyes, she didn't see savagery or threat. She saw a man of honor who had shown her mercy when he didn't have to, who understood loss, who commanded respect through character rather than force. You don't know me, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. I know enough. I know you are brave enough to track killers alone. I know you value justice over safety. I know you saved my life when you could have stayed hidden. These things tell me who you are. He leaned forward slightly. I do not ask you to love me. I ask you to consider whether you want to survive and what surviving might require. The truth of it hit Sarah like cold water. She had no home to return to. The trading post would have been claimed or destroyed by now. She had no money, no family, no prospects. She'd been so focused on revenge that she hadn't thought about what came after. And now here was Nahilze, offering her not just survival, but a purpose, a place, a life that might actually mean something. If I agreed, she said slowly, what would that mean? What would you expect? I would expect you to stand beside me as my wife, to help raise my son, to learn our ways and respect our people. In return, I would protect you, honor you, and help you find the justice you seek. His expression softened slightly. I would not force you to my bed. That would come only if you wished it. But in all other ways, you would be my wife, with all the rights and responsibilities that brings among my people. Sarah's mind raced. It was crazy. It was impossible. It was nothing like the life she'd imagined for herself. And yet, what alternative did she have? Return to white civilization as a woman who'd ventured into Apache territory alone? She'd be ruined, unmarriageable, unemployable. At least here, with Nahilzi, she'd have purpose. She'd have protection. And perhaps, just perhaps, she'd have something more. Before she could respond, a commotion erupted from where the outlaws were being held. Morrison had somehow worked his bonds loose and made a desperate grab for one of the guards' weapons. The warrior responded instantly, striking Morrison down with the butt of his rifle. Other warriors rushed over, and in moments the outlaw was subdued, bleeding from a new cut over his eye. Nahilzi rose quickly, his hand instinctively moving to his knife. Sarah stood too, her heart pounding as she watched Morrison being dragged forward and thrown at the chief's feet. The outlaw looked up, his eyes wild with fear and pain, and for the first time truly seemed to see Sarah. "You!" he gasped, blood running down his face. "Brennan's daughter! You did this! You led them to us!" "No," Sarah said, her voice cold and hard. "You did this when you murdered my father, when you murdered innocent Apache women. Your choices brought you here, Morrison. Nobody else's." The outlaw lunged toward her, but warriors held him back. "I'll kill you," he screamed. "I'll kill you like I killed that old fool of a father." Nahilzi moved with startling speed, his knife suddenly pressed against Morrison's throat. "You will speak no more," the chief said, his voice deadly calm. "Your words dishonor this woman and yourself." The dawn came cold and clear, painting the canyon walls in shades of gold and crimson that reminded Sarah of blood and fire. She hadn't slept. How could she, with such an impossible decision weighing on her mind and the sound of Morrison screaming still echoing in her ears? Nahilzi had ordered the outlaw gagged after his outburst, but the damage was done. Every warrior in camp now knew that Sarah had a personal connection to the prisoners, that her presence here was driven by vengeance just as theirs was. She sat wrapped in a blanket someone had provided, watching the camp come to life around her. Apache warriors moved with quiet efficiency, tending to horses, preparing food, checking weapons. They moved like men who'd spent their entire lives in motion, always ready to fight or flee as circumstances demanded. Sarah recognized that readiness from her own weeks on the trail. Out here, in this unforgiving land, you stayed alert or you died. Nahilzi emerged from his shelter as the sun broke fully over the canyon rim. He looked tired, as though he'd slept as poorly as Sarah had, but his bearing remained straight and dignified. He came to her fire and sat without speaking, accepting the coffee one of his warriors brought. For several minutes, they simply shared the silence and the warmth of the flames. "You have decided?" he finally asked, not looking at her. Sarah took a breath. She'd spent the night turning the question over in her mind from every angle, weighing impossible choices against each other. Return to white civilization alone and ruined? Stay here and become something she'd been raised to fear? Both options terrified her in different ways, but one offered at least the possibility of purpose and belonging. "I need to understand something first," Sarah said. "Why me? You could have any woman from your tribe. Why offer marriage to a white woman you barely know?" Nahilzi was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight of honesty that Sarah hadn't expected. "My first wife was chosen for me by my father when I was young. She was a good woman, a strong mother to our son, but we were matched for alliance, not for understanding. When she died, I grieved because she deserved grief, but I also felt relief that I would not have to pretend anymore. He turned to look at Sarah directly. When I saw you in the trees, I saw someone who had chosen to step outside the safety of her world. When you saved my life, I saw someone who acted from instinct rather than calculation. When you spoke of your father, I heard love and pain that matched my own. These things cannot be arranged by fathers or councils. These things come from the spirit, or they do not come at all. You barely know me, Sarah repeated, but her voice held less conviction this time. I know what I need to know, Nahilzi said simply. You are brave. You are honest. You seek justice, but you also have mercy in your heart, or you would not have saved me when you could have let Morrison kill me and then taken your own revenge. These qualities are rare. I would be a fool to let you walk away when the spirits have brought you to me. Sarah felt something shift in her chest, some wall she'd built beginning to crack. What about your son? What would he think of a white woman as his mother? Chino is 7 summers old. He remembers his mother, but he is young enough to accept another if she treats him with kindness. And he is wise enough, even at his age, to understand that strength and honor come in many colors. Nalze's expression softened. You would like him. He has his mother's gentle spirit, but also a stubbornness that reminds me of myself. And your people? Your warriors? What would they really think? Some would question it, Nahilzi admitted. But I am chief because my father was chief and because I have proven myself in battle and in council. My warriors follow me because I have earned their respect. If I say you are to be my wife, if I say you have proven your worth by saving my life, most will accept it. Those who do not will learn to accept it when they see that you are not weak, not a burden, but someone who adds to our strength. Sarah looked around the camp at the warriors who moved with such purpose and pride. I don't know your ways. I don't speak your language. How could I possibly be the wife of a chief when I know nothing of what that means? You will learn, Nahilzi said with quiet confidence. My sister Yellowbird, she will teach you. She speaks English, learned it from missionaries before she understood they wanted to change us into something we are not. She will help you learn our tongue, our customs, and you will teach us too. You know the white man's ways, how they think, what they value. This knowledge could help protect my people as more and more whites push into our lands. The practicality of it struck Sarah. This wasn't just about romance or even survival. Nahilzi was thinking strategically, seeing how a union between them could strengthen his position and his tribe. She should have been offended by the calculation, but instead she found herself respecting it. This was how leaders thought, weighing decisions not just on emotion but on what would benefit their people. And Morrison? She asked quietly. What happens to him and his men? Nalze's expression hardened. They will face justice today. Apache justice. It will not be gentle, but it will be deserved. If you wish, you may witness it. If you wish, you may even participate in their judgment. You have as much right to vengeance as any of my warriors. Sarah thought about that, about watching Morrison die, maybe even causing his death herself. She dreamed of it during the long weeks of tracking him, had imagined putting a bullet through his heart just as he'd put one through her father's. But now, faced with the reality of it, she felt something unexpected. Not mercy exactly, but a kind of weariness with the whole cycle of violence and revenge. I want him to know, she said finally. I want him to know that I found him, that I helped bring about his end. But I don't need to pull the trigger or wield the knife. Justice is justice, whether I deliver it personally or witness others do it in my name. Nahilzi nodded slowly, approval clear in his eyes. This is wisdom. Revenge that consumes the one seeking it is not true justice. It is merely another wound. They sat in silence again, and Sarah felt the weight of her decision settling over her like the blanket around her shoulders. She thought about her father, wondered what he would make of all this. Daniel Brennan had respected the Apache, had learned their language and traded fairly with them. He taught Sarah that people were people, regardless of their skin color or customs. Would he have approved of her marrying Nahilzi? She'd never know for certain, but she thought perhaps he might have understood. "If I agree to this," Sarah said slowly, "I have conditions." Nahilzi raised an eyebrow but nodded for her to continue. "I keep my rifle and my father's watch, assuming Morrison still has it. They're all I have left of my family, and I won't give them up." "Agreed." "A warrior should keep her weapons, and a daughter should have her father's memory. I learn your ways, but I don't lose myself completely. I'm still Sarah Brennan, even if I become your wife. You would be Sarah, wife of Nahilzi. Both names, both parts of who you are. This is acceptable. And if this doesn't work, if we find we cannot live together peacefully, you let me leave. Not as an enemy, but as someone who tried and found the path too difficult." This one gave Nahilzi pause. He studied her face for a long moment before responding. "Among my people, marriage is not easily broken. But I understand you ask this because you fear being trapped, because you have already lost your freedom once when your father died and you had nowhere to go. So I will agree to this, but with my own condition. You must give it one full cycle of seasons, 1 year to learn our ways and find your place among us. If after that time you still wish to leave, I will provide you with horses and supplies and let you go in peace." Sarah considered this. A year was a long time, but it was also fair. You couldn't learn a whole new way of life in a few weeks or months. "Agreed," she said. "Then there is only one more thing to discuss," Nahilzi said, and something in his tone made Sarah's pulse quicken. "If you are to be my wife, the marriage must be recognized by my people. This means a ceremony today before we leave this place. It means you must stand before my warriors and declare yourself willing. And there is a tradition." He trailed off, seeming almost uncomfortable for the first time since Sarah had met him. "What tradition?" she asked. "Among my people, when a marriage is made, it must be consummated. Not in public," he added quickly, seeing her expression, "but it must be clear that the marriage is real, not just words. Otherwise, the warriors will see it as a show, a trick to protect you, and they will not accept it." Sarah felt her face flush. She'd known, of course, that marriage implied physical intimacy, but hearing it stated so directly made it suddenly very real. "You said you wouldn't force me," she reminded him, "and I will not. But I ask that you trust me enough to be alone with me, to let me show you that I can be gentle as well as strong. What happens between us beyond that can develop as it will, but my people must believe the marriage is real." The honesty of it disarmed Sarah's fear somewhat. Nahilzi wasn't demanding or threatening. He was explaining the reality of what her choice would mean, giving her the chance to refuse if she couldn't accept the terms. It was more respect than many white men would have shown in the same situation. "All right," Sarah said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I agree to your terms. I'll marry you today before your warriors, and I'll trust you to be the man of honor you've shown yourself to be." Nalze's face broke into the first genuine smile Sarah had seen from him. It transformed his features, making him look younger and somehow more approachable. "Then we have an agreement," he said. He stood and offered her his hand. "Come, there is much to prepare, and Yellowbird will want to meet you before the ceremony." Sarah took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. As she stood there, hand in his, looking into his dark eyes, she felt a strange mixture of terror and excitement. She was about to marry a man she'd known for less than a day, join a tribe whose language she didn't speak, and step into a life completely foreign to everything she'd known. It was madness. But it was also, perhaps, exactly what she needed. Yellowbird turned out to be a woman of about Sarah's age, with intelligent eyes and a direct manner that reminded Sarah of her own straightforward approach to life. She appeared at the fire shortly after Nahilzi left to prepare for the ceremony. carrying a bundle of clothing and wearing an expression that was equal parts curiosity and skepticism. "So you are the white woman who saved my brother's life," Yellowbird said in English that carried only a slight accent. "And now you will marry him and become one of us. This is either very brave or very foolish, and I have not yet decided which." Sarah couldn't help but appreciate the honesty. "I'm not sure myself," she admitted. "Maybe it's both." Yellowbird laughed, a sound that seemed to cut through the tension. "I like you already." A woman who knows her own uncertainty is wiser than one who pretends to know everything. She set down the bundle and began unfolding it. "I have brought you proper clothing for the ceremony. You cannot marry a chief dressed like a trail rider." The clothing was beautiful in a way Sarah hadn't expected. The dress was made of soft deerskin, decorated with intricate beadwork and patterns that seemed to tell a story. Yellowbird helped her into it, then began working on Sarah's hair, which had been tied back in a simple braid for weeks. "My brother tells me you seek revenge for your father's murder," Yellowbird said as she worked. "That you track these men alone through dangerous country. This shows strength of spirit, but strength alone does not make a good wife or mother. Tell me, white woman, why should I welcome you into my family?" Sarah thought carefully before answering. "I can't give you reasons that would satisfy everyone, but I can tell you that I understand loss, that I know what it means to fight for justice, and that I'm willing to learn. I don't expect to be accepted immediately. I expect to earn my place among your people, just as I would have to earn it anywhere else." Yellowbird paused in her work, meeting Sarah's eyes in the reflection of a small mirror she'd produced. "You speak honestly, at least." Many white women would make promises they couldn't keep or pretend to virtues they don't possess. Honesty is a good foundation. She resumed working on Sarah's hair. "My brother has been alone too long. His first wife was chosen for politics, and though she gave him a son, she did not understand him. He needs someone who sees him as a man, not just as a chief. And you think I can do that?" Sarah asked. "I think you already do. You saved his life not because he was a chief, but because it was the right thing to do. That is what he needs. Someone who acts from their own honor, not from obligation or fear." Yellowbird finished with Sarah's hair and stepped back to examine her work. "There. Now you look like someone worthy of marrying a chief." Sarah looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. The deerskin dress transformed her, and Yellowbird had woven her hair into an intricate style decorated with small feathers and beads. She looked, Sarah thought, like someone who belonged to this world of canyon walls and warrior camps. "Thank you," Sarah said quietly. Yellowbird nodded. "Do not thank me yet. The ceremony is only the beginning. Living among us, learning our ways, earning the respect of warriors who see all whites as enemies, that will be the real challenge. But if you can do those things, if you can make my brother happy and be a good mother to my nephew, then I will call you sister and mean it." Before Sarah could respond, a warrior appeared at the entrance to the shelter, speaking rapidly in Apache. Yellowbird listened, then turned to Sarah. "It is time. Nahilzi waits at the ceremonial fire. Are you ready?" Was she ready? No, not remotely. But she'd passed the point of turning back, and something in her didn't want to turn back anyway. Sarah stood, smoothed the deerskin dress, and nodded. "I'm ready." The walk to the ceremonial fire felt both endless and too short. Warriors lined the path, their faces showing everything from curiosity to hostility to grudging respect. Sarah kept her head high and her eyes forward, refusing to show fear even though her heart hammered in her chest. Yellowbird walked beside her, a silent show of support that Sarah appreciated more than she could say. Nahilzi stood by the fire, and Sarah's breath caught at the sight of him. He dressed in ceremonial clothing, a shirt decorated with intricate quillwork, leggings with beaded patterns, and a headdress of eagle feathers that proclaimed his status as chief. He looked every inch the warrior leader, powerful and proud, but when his eyes met Sarah's, she saw the same uncertainty she felt, the same leap of faith they were both taking. An elderly man stood beside Nahilzi, his weathered face speaking of many years and much wisdom. This, Yellowbird whispered, was Running Wolf, the tribe's shaman. He would perform the ceremony and bind them together in the eyes of the Apache people. Running Wolf began to speak, his voice carrying authority despite his age. Yellowbird translated quietly for Sarah. He says that marriage is a bond forged in fire and tested by time. He says that you come from different worlds, but that sometimes the spirits bring together those who are meant to walk the same path, even if that path is not the one they expected. The shaman gestured for Sarah and Nahilzi to step closer to the fire. They did, and Running Wolf tied their wrists together with a cord made of woven grasses. More words followed, and Yellowbird continued to translate. He asks if you come to this marriage freely, of your own will, and if you promise to honor the ways of the people and stand beside Nahilzi as his wife and partner. Sarah took a deep breath. This was it, the moment of commitment. She could still refuse, could still try to find another way. But as she looked at Nahilzi's face, at the hope and respect she saw there, she knew her answer. I come freely, Sarah said clearly, in English, then repeated the Apache words Yellowbird had taught her earlier. I promise to honor your ways and stand beside Nahilzi. Running Wolf turned to Nahilzi, speaking more words. The chief's response was firm and clear, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face. Yellowbird translated again. He says he will protect you, honor you, and treat you as a true wife. He says he will help you learn the Apache ways and will value your strength and courage. He says he will be patient as you find your place among the people. The shaman untied the cord and handed it to Nahilzi, who carefully wound it around Sarah's wrist like a bracelet. Then Running Wolf produced a small bowl filled with some kind of paint and marked both their foreheads with a symbol Sarah didn't recognize. More words followed, and then the shaman stepped back, raising his arms to address the assembled warriors. It is done, Yellowbird whispered. You are now wife to Nahilzi, daughter of the Apache people. May the spirits guide you both. The warriors began to chant, a rhythmic sound that seemed to make the very air vibrate. Nahilzi took Sarah's hand and led her around the fire, once, twice, 3 times, while the chanting grew louder. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the chanting stopped. Nahilzi pulled Sarah close and kissed her, not gently but not roughly either, a kiss that spoke of claiming and promise in equal measure. When they broke apart, Sarah was breathing hard, her face flushed. The warriors began to disperse, some looking approving, others still skeptical, but the ceremony was complete. She was married to an Apache chief. The reality of it hit her like a wave, and she might have stumbled if Nalze's arm hadn't been around her waist, steady and strong. Come, he said quietly. We must complete the ritual in privacy, and then there is something I must give you. He led her to a shelter that had been prepared at the edge of camp, larger and more private than the others. Inside it was surprisingly comfortable, with furs spread on the ground and a small fire burning in a carefully contained pit. Nahilzi let the entrance flap fall closed behind them, and suddenly they were alone, truly alone. For the first time since this whirlwind had begun? I know you are frightened, Nahilzi said, moving to a bundle in the corner of the shelter. I would be frightened too in your place, but I meant what I said in my vows. I will be patient. I will not force you. But I must ask you to trust me now, even though trust is a difficult thing to give. He returned with something in his hands, and Sarah's heart stopped. It was her father's silver watch, the one Morrison had stolen, gleaming in the firelight. How did you? I took it from Morrison before the ceremony. I wanted to give it to you now, as a wedding gift, to show you that I understand what you have lost and what you have given up to be here. Nahilzi placed the watch in her hands, and Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. Your father's memory will be honored here, as a wife of mine, as a member of our people. This I promise you. Sarah clutched the watch to her chest, overwhelmed by emotion. Nahilzi had understood exactly what this would mean to her, had made sure she got it back not through violence or vengeance but as a gift, a symbol of his commitment to honoring her past even as they built a future together. "Thank you," she whispered, and then, because words weren't enough, she stepped forward and kissed him, really kissed him, with feeling and intention. Nalze's arms came around her, gentle but firm, and Sarah felt something unlock in her chest, some barrier she'd been holding against the world. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Nahilzi searched her face. "You are sure?" he asked. Sarah thought about everything that had brought her to this moment, her father's death, her quest for revenge, the impossible choice that had become the only choice, and now this man who had shown her more respect and understanding than she'd ever expected. "Get inside first," she whispered, surprising herself with her boldness, "and pregnant me." The request was unconventional, shocking even, but it came from a place of deep instinct. Sarah understood that pregnancy would cement her place in the tribe, would give her undeniable status and purpose. More than that, it would be a commitment to this new life, a bridge between her past and her future. She would carry Nahilze's child, and in doing so, become truly Apache. Nahilze's eyes widened with surprise, then something else desire, yes, but also tenderness and understanding. "You honor me with your trust," he said softly, "and I will honor you with my faithfulness and protection. Always?" He drew her down onto the furs, and Sarah went willingly, knowing that this was her choice, her path forward. Outside, she could hear the sounds of the camp settling for the evening, warriors talking, horses moving. But inside this shelter, it was just the two of them, building something new from the ashes of what they'd both lost. The dawnlight was different this time, Sarah thought as she woke in Nalze's arms. It wasn't the lonely, fearful light of a woman on a desperate quest. It was the light of someone who belonged somewhere, who had a place and a purpose. She could feel the warmth of her new husband beside her, could hear his steady breathing, and felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced since before her father's death. Nahilzi stirred and opened his eyes, immediately finding her face. "Good morning, wife," he said, the English words sounding almost formal, but the warmth in his tone unmistakable. "Good morning, husband," Sarah replied, testing out the word. It felt strange on her tongue, but not wrong. They rose and dressed, and Nahilzi explained what would happen today. Morrison and his remaining men would face tribal justice for their crimes. Then the war party would return to their main camp, where Sarah would begin her new life in earnest. The matter-of-fact way he discussed it helped Sarah feel grounded in the reality of her situation. The trial, if it could be called that, was swift and thorough. Running Wolf presided, with Nahilzi and the senior warriors forming a council. Each of Morrison's crimes was recounted: the murder of Sarah's father, the attack on the Apache camp, the killing of innocent women. Witnesses spoke, including Sarah, who gave her testimony in English with Yellowbird translating. Morrison tried to defend himself, claiming he'd acted in self-defense, that the Apache women had attacked first, that Sarah's father had pulled a weapon. But his own men contradicted him, their fear of Apache justice apparently outweighing their loyalty to their leader. The truth came out piece by piece. Morrison had led the attack on the Apache camp while drunk, had murdered Daniel Brennan in cold blood for refusing to hand over a family heirloom, had left a trail of violence across the territory. The verdict was unanimous. Morrison and two of his men who had participated in the Apache camp attack would face execution. The others, younger men who had been following Morrison's lead but hadn't personally killed anyone, would be branded and released as a warning to other whites who might consider attacking Apache people. Nahilzi offered Sarah a choice. She could participate in Morrison's execution or simply witness it. Sarah thought about it carefully. She'd spent weeks dreaming of killing Morrison herself, but now, standing in the clear morning light with her father's watch in her pocket and a new life stretching before her, she found she didn't need that personal vengeance. "I'll witness it," she said. That's enough. The execution was neither quick nor gentle, but Sarah watched without flinching, thinking of her father's last moments and the Apache women who had died for Morrison's entertainment. When it was over, she felt not joy but a sense of closure, of a chapter ending so another could begin. Yellowbird appeared at her side as the camp began breaking down for the journey back. You did well, she said quietly. Many would have needed to strike the blow themselves. Restraint is wisdom. I just want to move forward now, Sarah said honestly. Revenge was what drove me here, but it's not what will keep me here. The journey to the main Apache camp took 2 days, and Sarah used the time to begin learning the language and customs. Yellowbird proved to be a patient teacher, drilling Sarah on words and phrases, explaining the social structure of the tribe, preparing her for the reality of life as Nalize's wife. The main camp was larger than Sarah had expected, with perhaps 200 people living in a collection of traditional wickiups and newer canvas structures. As the war party rode in, people emerged to greet them, and Sarah felt dozens of eyes assessing her, measuring this strange white woman who had married their chief. Nahilze helped her down from her horse and kept her close as they walked through the camp. He spoke to his people in Apache, and though Sarah couldn't understand all the words, she caught her name and heard the respect in his voice. He was presenting her not as a captive or a curiosity, but as his wife, and the distinction mattered. Then a small boy broke free from the crowd and ran to Nahilze, wrapping his arms around his father's waist. This had to be Chino, the son Nahilze had spoken of. The boy was beautiful, with his father's dark eyes and a smile that seemed to light up his whole face. Nahilze lifted his son and spoke to him in Apache, then switched to English. Chino, this is Sarah. She is my new wife, which makes her your mother now. She is brave and strong, and she will help us both. Chino studied Sarah with the serious intensity only children can manage. You are white, he observed in careful English. I am, Sarah agreed. Does that bother you? The boy considered this. My father says whites can be good or bad, just like Apache. He says you are good. He says you saved his life. I tried to, Sarah said, kneeling so she was eye level with the boy, and he saved mine. So I guess we're even. Chino thought about this, then nodded gravely. Then you can be my mother. But I still remember my first mother. Is that okay? Sarah felt her heart squeeze. That's more than okay. That's how it should be. I'm not here to replace her. I'm just here to be part of your family now. The boy's serious expression broke into a smile, and he surprised Sarah by hugging her. Over his head, Sarah met Nahilze's eyes and saw approval and something that might have been love or the beginning of it. The days that followed were challenging but also rewarding. Sarah moved into Nahilze's home, a larger wickiup that reflected his status as chief. She began learning the language in earnest, fumbling through conversations and laughing at her own mistakes. Yellowbird became not just a teacher but a friend, helping Sarah navigate the complex social dynamics of tribal life. Some of the Apache women were welcoming, curious about this white woman who had chosen to join them. Others were hostile or suspicious, questioning whether Sarah could ever truly be one of them. Sarah didn't try to win everyone over immediately. Instead, she focused on learning, on helping where she could, on proving through actions rather than words that she was serious about this new life. Nahilze was patient and supportive, teaching her to ride Apache style, showing her how to prepare food according to tribal customs, explaining the spiritual beliefs that guided his people. At night, in the privacy of their home, he was both passionate and gentle, and Sarah found herself falling in love with him in a way she'd never expected to love anyone. 6 weeks after the wedding, Sarah woke one morning feeling nauseated. Yellowbird took one look at her and smiled knowingly. So it begins, she said. You carry my brother's child. The pregnancy was confirmed by the tribal healer, and the news spread through the camp rapidly. Sarah noticed an immediate shift in how she was treated. The women who had been skeptical became more welcoming. And even the warriors who had questioned Nahalze's decision to marry a white woman seemed to accept her more readily. A child was proof of commitment, of belonging, of a future that bridged two worlds. Nahilze was overjoyed, his normally reserved demeanor cracking to show pure happiness. "You have given me a great gift," he said, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "You have given yourself to this life, to our people, to our future." "You gave me a reason to have a future," Sarah replied honestly. "I was lost when you found me. Now I'm found." As Sarah's pregnancy progressed, she settled more deeply into tribal life. She learned to speak Apache with increasing fluency, to prepare food and clothing in the traditional ways, to understand the rhythms and rituals that govern the community. Chino attached himself to her with the enthusiasm only a 7-year-old could muster, and Sarah found herself becoming genuinely fond of the bright, curious boy. The birth came in early spring, during a time when the desert bloomed with unexpected flowers and the air smelled of rain and possibility. Sarah labored for hours, attended by Yellowbird and the tribal midwives, with Nahilze pacing outside the wickiup like warriors had probably been pacing since the beginning of time. When the baby finally came, a healthy boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's lighter skin, Sarah wept with joy and relief. Nahilze came in to meet his new son, and the expression on his face was one Sarah would treasure for ever pure love, gratitude, and pride. "What should we name him?" Sarah asked, exhausted but happy. "In my language we will call him Kurik, which means bear," Nahilze said, "for he will be strong like the bear. But he should also have an English name to honor both sides of who he is." "Daniel," Sarah said immediately, "after my father." "Daniel Kurik," Nahilze smiled and nodded. "Daniel Kurik. It is a good name, a strong name. He will honor both his grandfathers." The months that followed were the happiest of Sarah's life. She had a family, a home, a purpose. She had love and respect and a sense of belonging she'd never experienced before. True, there were still challenges. Some Apache remained suspicious of whites, and Sarah sometimes struggled with customs that seemed strange or difficult. But with Nahilze beside her, with Yellowbird as her sister and friend, with Chino and little Daniel filling her days with purpose, she felt genuinely at peace. One evening, as she sat outside their wickiup watching the sunset paint the canyon walls in shades of gold and crimson, Nahilze came to sit beside her. Daniel nursed contentedly in her arms while Chino played nearby with other children. "Are you happy?" Nahilze asked quietly. Sarah thought about the question, about everything she'd lost and everything she'd gained. She thought about her father, gone but not forgotten, his watch still tucked safely in her belongings. She thought about Morrison, dead and buried, justice finally served. She thought about the woman she'd been angry, lost, driven by revenge, and the woman she'd become a wife, a mother, a member of a community. "Yes," she said simply, "I'm happy. This isn't the life I expected, but it's the life I choose. Every day, I choose it." Nahilze put his arm around her shoulders, and they sat together in comfortable silence, watching their son play as the desert sunset blazed around them. Sarah thought about that moment in the canyon when she'd whispered her bold request, when she'd taken the leap of faith that had brought her here. "Get inside first and pregnant me," she'd said, choosing commitment and future over revenge and past. It had been the right choice. Somewhere in the distance, an eagle cried, circling high above the canyon. Sarah watched it soar, free and strong, and felt the same freedom in her own heart. She'd lost a father and found a family. She'd sought revenge and found love. She'd been a woman alone and become a woman who belonged. The Apache chief hadn't known he'd ride home with a wife that day in the canyon, but Sarah was glad he had. And as the sun set on another day in her new life, surrounded by the people who had become her people, she knew that sometimes the best endings come from the most unexpected beginnings. The future stretched before them, uncertain but filled with promise. And Sarah Nahilzi, for she carried both names now, both identities woven together, was ready to meet it with courage, with love, and with the strength she'd always possessed but had never fully understood until now. This was home. This was family. This was where she was meant to be.